Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome again to the Symposium on Disability Cultural Centers in Higher Education for our last session of day one. And we're wrapping up day one with a session called Why DCCs? Research on the impact of disability cultural centers. We're excited to bring together and welcome Liz Thompson, Dr. Liz Thompson, and Dr. Toni Saia, who have agreed to share their original research with us. We started today with the question, why disability culture, right? That was one of the first sessions we had. And now we're grateful to bookend our day with these insights about the impact disability cultural centers can have. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Toni Saia.
Thank you so much, Javin. I am so excited to be here for the end to end today's day. So I am, as already stated, I'm Dr. Toni Saia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman in my early 30s. I have pink, black framed glasses and blonde hair, straight with some brown roots coming in, and my background is blurred, and you can see a little bit of my white shirt peeping through the camera. So before I just jump into research, I think it's a little important to provide some context of why me and why I'm in this space. So I identify as a disabled woman. I'm a wheelchair user. I shared in the first session, this whole Zoom world is very interesting for me, given that all of a sudden now I have a choice of whether I want to disclose or not. And so that has been a very unique experience. And I think for the purposes of these conversations, it's really important for me to obviously share my identity because it has impacted the work I research and my roles within higher ed. And so that's really important for me. And it's still very strange. It feels very strange because, you know, when I roll up as a wheelchair user, there's kind of no denying it. And so, yeah, so I come with that context. Currently, I am an assistant professor at San Diego State University in the Department of Administration, Rehabilitation, and Post-Secondary Education. And I'm the director there of the Rehabilitation Technology Certificate as well. And much of my research has been to bring a progressive understanding of disability into the applied fields. Because by trade, I am a rehabilitation counselor. But I always felt like within rehab counseling, we talk a lot about servicing people, specifically disabled people, but we don't do a lot of talking about understanding the lived experience and disability as a culture and identity. And so when I got my master's in rehab counseling, and then I quickly went to get a PhD in counselor education and supervision. But I jokingly say that I might as well have gotten my doctorate in higher education, because my research is very geared towards higher education and specifically disability cultural centers. And when I think about how I ended up even thinking about having a dissertation about disability culture centers, I think about my own identity and what I was longing for as a disabled student. And I had the immense privilege of being the first program coordinator of the Disability Cultural Center at the University of Arizona, which I know you heard briefly about if you attended the previous session. And so I was really lucky to align my research with what I was currently doing as the program coordinator. I just want to own that during that time, the program coordinator was the sole staff person of the Disability Cultural Center. So there was nobody else in the space. So although the title was program coordinator, I was the director of the space. There was no one else in the space, but just for funding and things like that and purposes, that was the title. And so I was in this role of starting a cultural center and having to really drip the faucet to get people to know and on board. But it was interesting when I was looking up research on disability cultural centers specifically, nothing was coming up. Maybe one article that was, it wasn't really a study, just outlining maybe some ideas about a cultural center. And so from that, I decided I really want to use my position as a unique opportunity to develop some groundbreaking research on what is a disability cultural center. Because yes, there are parallels to the disability experience like other cultural centers on campus, but what specifically is a disability cultural center? And specifically, and most important to me, was I wanted to know that from the perspective of disabled students. I didn't want to ask people that were in leadership role. I specifically wanted to know, what did students on a campus think about a disability cultural center and what their experiences were. So my dissertation was titled "Disability as an Identity, Disability Cultural Centers in Higher Education." And I'm really excited, and I'm just going to self-promote for 1 second, that this coming in 2022, I got it published, a shorter version of my dissertation, which is great because nobody wants to read a 180-page dissertation besides my mom. So it's great that it is now available in the JPED, the Journal for Post-Secondary Education and Disability. That's a HEDS journal, and I'm really excited that it's in there. And it's great because now we have some published work that is data-driven, and again, it's qualitatively data-driven, because if you know anything about me, you know that I care about the lived experience and not the amount of people. I think data has its place, but for this, it was really important to center the lived experience. So in my dissertation, I interviewed students that were part of the Disability Cultural Center at the University of Arizona. Now, I didn't gatekeep what their involvement looked like because it was a brand new space. And so the only the criteria that they needed to have to be interviewed was they had to identify as disabled. That was really important. And they had to be affiliated with the UADCC in some way. So, and this is important. So it didn't necessarily mean that they had to be affiliated with the Disability Resource Center, right? That had nothing to do. They could be, and that wasn't going to prevent them, but this was specifically about affiliation with the UADCC. And so I did a lot of interviewing and really qualitative approaches, and got a lot of information. Which was great. When you do qualitative research, you get a lot. But it was really challenging to do this work because I couldn't mirror anybody else's work. There was nothing else to mirror. So there were no questions that I can just take from another study and change them for Disability Cultural Center work. So in a lot of ways, it felt like I was making my own bridge. I knew that this was important, and I knew that DCCs needed some legitimacy, especially because as I was deciding on a topic, I just went through this process of trying to get it funded, where people wanted information specifically about DCCs. So while, obviously the goal was to center the lived experiences of disabled people, I also selfishly wanted this data to give us some stake in the game. And to help others to do this research and to lay a groundwork to do this research. So in my research, when I was asking, and I had one central question, what is the role of a DCC on campus? That was the question that guided my research. That was all the sub questions were getting at that. And it's interesting. When I was doing the interviews, I was just listening, and I was hearing a lot of the same things, but I didn't know how the data would emerge. Again, I didn't have another article to kind of look at and say, maybe this is going to come up. And what ended up happening in my interviews was there was a clear disconnect when people were talking about disability in terms of the institution as a whole versus within the DCC. So the way I framed my information was themes that came out of the institution as a whole, and then themes that came out around the DCC. And you could imagine, if you know anything about the disability experience in higher ed, the way disability was viewed and the institution as a whole was starkly different than the way students felt disability was being addressed within the DCC. So just for a quick, and I know I'm speaking in community, right? But institution, it was very much, accommodation framework, right? We address the individual legally, like a legalized version of disability. And then at the other end, when we were talking about disability within the cultural center, it was as an identity. It was something to be celebrated, an aspect of diversity, a characteristic to be proud of, right? And I think that this was really interesting. I mean, for some of you, you were like, well, obviously, hello, the higher ed institution and then the DCC, obviously, but because the center wasn't open that long when I was conducting interviews, I mean, it was only a couple months old. The fact that students could name such stark differences told me the level of importance of this space. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Any major, I think I'm doing okay with time this time. Let me know, Javin. Okay. So first, again, right, this idea of, so when I looked at the institution, again, the climate and attitudes was very geared towards accommodations or a lack of advocacy and social change and a lack of a sense of community. And then at the cultural center, it was the opposite, right? Quotes like the collective voice of the DCC can talk to the higher ups, whoever the people are who make big decisions about accessibility and the experiences of disabled students. A DCC is a more holistic view of disability rather than a diagnosis, and these are direct quotes. A physical space where you could talk, laugh, be yourself, and not feel like you will be physically harmed is important. And I don't know how many of you attended the other session, but I want to bring this up. At the last session, I talked about the unintention, and just because we had a space of how the UADCC decided to have their DCC housed within their Disability Resource Center. And it was interesting, right? While there's a lot of information on this, and some students feel strongly about one way and some another, for the U of A specifically, students felt that they didn't like that it was combined with the DRC, not because they didn't like the idea of a one-stop shop, but because of where the DRC is located, which is like a subset. It's kind of it's not off campus, but it's on the outskirts of campus. So some of the quotes related to that, which I think that are really important, it's not well known. It's like a hidden gem. The DCC is not treated like other student organizations are. It's treated like a subset of segregation. And I think that opinion is largely stemming from the location of the DRC as a whole, right? Not the idea that we don't like, that we could get, because I mean, as stated in previous sessions, right? It's really hard to have culture and identity if you don't have access. And so our needs are a part of disability culture as well. So that was one thing that came up. But one thing I really liked were the themes, right? So one theme was my kind of question, right? What is a DCC? And things that came up in my dissertation were the dedicated space physical space, location, disability, culture, and community. So this quote, right? A community space like the Disability Cultural Center, where you can go in and be like, okay, A, I'm welcome here. B, I'm not the only person. And C, if my disability is essentially celebrated, then that's a space where you could be like, okay, I'm proud as a physically disabled person, as opposed to being here or isolated one, or even just going to the DCC and being like, I'm here because I need help with something. So again, you can see that very distinct difference between needing help versus being celebrated. And I just want to own the fact, right? Because some of you all might be like, well, I mean, it's a hidden gem because it was brand new, right? And it was brand new. But I think that the hidden gem was also, it's hard to be brand new when you're on the outskirts of campus, right? You're not where all the other cultural centers are housed. And that also prohibits some of the easy collaboration. And I'm sure all of you could think about a time when you're in your office and you're all together and you could easily walk to your neighbor and just be like, hey, you want to collaborate on this? Where well, I know in pandemic that's sort of out, but that was a thing prior to pandemic. And for that, we had to be a lot more pushy in getting those collaborations because of this hidden gem aspect. Another thing is, and this is what I couldn't find in the research, right? Like what, we're saying we need disability cultural centers, and obviously I firmly believe we do, but what does it do? And that was another thing I wanted my research to answer. And I think that, again, leadership, advocacy, faculty training, and pride. And one quote that, I feel encompasses this is, DCC events has given me a tangible way to find allies, people who care to learn more about the disability community, think that the cultural center can turn all of it on its head, for a lack of a better word. So that previous very medical version of disability, this quote is saying they think that the cultural center can turn that all around. I think it's going to put out not only events, but a space and an area where you can take those experiences and turn them to be different, and put different views of disability on campus, so that we're encouraging. No, we're not here to be pitied. We're not here for you to feel sorry for us. We're here because we want to be part of the college experience. So I think that that was a really powerful quote. The other thing, because I broke it down in the institution and I looked at the same themes at the institution and then the same themes within the Disability Cultural Center, a lot of recommendations came out of my dissertation from the mouths of disabled people, which I think is really important, because often disabled people are not at the table. And so it's always like, I hear people say, well, I didn't know the event was inaccessible. And it's like, well, did you invite anybody to the table? But never mind just inviting, what do you do to keep them at the table? And so I'm not going to read them all, but some of the avenues for improving accessibility on a college campus were appropriate space in classrooms to navigate around the room, easy movable furniture, using microphones consistently, making all class notes available to everyone prior to class, using exclusively automatic doors, the removal of fluorescent lighting, right? And then on the other end, because this is where we felt the cultural center came in, what are some avenues to address the climate and attitudes? Because as I said before, many of the participants in the study felt that the DCC chipped away at some of these climate and attitudes. But what if, you're at an institution that's not ready to just open a Disability Cultural Center, or maybe they just started? What can we do? What are some things we can do? And some of those things are trust and validate disabled student experience to decrease disabled students' feelings of not being trusted, or making the non-disabled people the experts on the situation. include disability in diversity and social justice conversations without tokenizing, infuse disability culture and history into the curriculum, host disability pride events, respect the lived experience of disability. Knowledge about disability and understanding the lived experience are two different things. And so obviously, you know, it's hard to pack my entire dissertation research into 30 minutes or any amount of time, because it felt like my baby for the longest time. But I will say that I feel that this work is even more important because there's such little on it. And, you know, many people were like, well, you got to cut it. There's so much data there, but I purposely didn't because I really, I didn't want to be the gatekeeper of people's experiences within the DCC. And, you know, I will say across all participants, and it was a qualitative study, so there wasn't, you know, 200 participants, right? But across all participants, people have said that within the DCC, this was the first space that they could explore their identity, that they even seen disability as an identity. And I don't know about you, but that's pretty powerful. And something that, you know, and this was for a cultural center that was only around maybe months prior, right? And again, I realized there were only 6 participants, but I think we said this in the last session, right? It doesn't matter. 6 people still have value and have contributions. And I would imagine that even though this was a smaller study, that we would hear a lot of the same things now. And I would love to see this this be redone now that this specific cultural center has been open for, you know, many years, right? Because when I was doing it, it was new. So you were fighting the battle of it being brand new, and then asking students, you know, what does this space do? But even in that short amount of time, they were able to come up with very nuanced answers. And for me, I think the biggest thing and the takeaway is that we had a space. And I think that that's really important. I want to end with a really important quote that I believe sums up my dissertation beautifully. And it says, my experience at the DCC has been incredibly positive. I feel like it's about damn time we have a space. We need this space, and just giving us this space is very important. I want to participate in other cultural centers, but they don't get it. The DCC has made me feel like I have a disability identity. I feel a sense of belonging, seeing other folks being supportive and active in their support. Taking the time to be in the space is validating. And for me, I know that this might sound cliche, but for me, a central piece of a disability cultural center is that space. We need a space to reclaim. And so I hope that, and I know you're going to hear more information from Liz's perspective, and I hope all of you hang out for the Q&A, because there's a lot more, and I'm just so excited. And Liz, I guess you could take it away. I gave you 1 minute extra.
Thanks, Toni. Okay, so I will share my screen. I will also put in the chat, because I have made some updates on everyone see the title slide, exploring the impact. Okay, so exploring the impact of a disability cultural center on disabled students in higher education. We have in the bottom left corner the DCC Symposium logo, a teal colored abstract minimalist rendition of a flower with a circle above. two petals angling left and right. And yeah, good evening. I also know I have a friend that's joining us from abroad internationally. So I really appreciate everyone's time with us tonight. It's been a long day, but also I hope everyone can agree it's been a really educational and also invigorating day. So Elizabeth on Thompson, you can call me Liz. I use they, them, their pronouns. DCC Symposium, University of Illinois, Chicago, July 7th, 2022. Slide 2, just to really make overt accessibility, here's an image from the Access is Love initiative by Mia Mingus, Alice Wong, and Sandy Ho. Access is Love is in Black capital letters with the O being a big red heart. And so I already put the link to the slides in the chat. I will read all the text, describe all images. I've used high contrast color font. We have our live captioner. The slides are caption friendly. I will be mindful of my rate of speaking. They're numbered. And as as Davin said earlier, make the space your own. So slide 3, a little bit more about myself and how I have negotiated the topic in the world. Here is a graphic of a Black marker pen with a white circle in the middle. And so I identify as a disabled, bi-queer, gender nonconforming person who is dark-skinned Vietnamese adoptee, raised and worked in the Midwest. I also have shaved black hair, black eyes, and charcoal glasses, wearing a bright orange sleeveless top tonight. I've worked at 2 different cultural centers in higher education for about 12 years, and in higher education in general for nearly 25 years. I'm currently the director at the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Intercultural Programs, and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Minnesota Morris campus. And I am in Morris, Minnesota, which is located on land that has been cared for and called home by the Dakota people and later the Ojibwe people and other Native peoples from time immemorial. And by offering this land acknowledgement, I affirm tribal sovereignty and express respect for Native peoples and nations. So slide 4, with a graphic of a Black question mark within a circle. My research question was, what is the impact of a disability cultural center in higher education on disabled students? And then I broke it down into kind of the personal sphere, cultural, social, and academic sphere. And so unlike Toni, I had a little bit of a trailblazer. And so while Toni and I had gotten to know each other, as I was in my last part of dissertating, I knew that Toni's dissertation was public. Also really, it was great to see her work being published. And so I was familiar, but also I think just to, I don't know, have a little bit of separation. I didn't dive too deep into her work. And so that's why I think today I'm just really excited to kind of put finally both of our work into conversation together. Slide 5, importance of research. So overall, there's a gap in the diversity, equity, and inclusion literature, not including disability. There's a gap in disability studies area, not including disability cultural centers. There's scant literature on cultural centers' work overall in higher education, and that the phenomenon of disability cultural centers is vastly understudied in the academy. Slide 6, pending and current disability cultural centers. And here is a map of the US disability cultural centers with orange and green dots denoting created or pending with their year date established as of this month, July 2022. So overall, I have found that there are 11 different universities where I would say that that some sort of disability cultural center is pending. And I'll offer that this all comes from just internet research. And so as we heard from some folks earlier, I think it was actually Aisha from University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, is that, you know, now more than ever, it really is vital to have something out there on social media in a public facing way, a blog, something that is public. Because when I type in disability cultural centers and I go at least into 8 or 9 or 10 web pages, you know, if you're not in those first 10 web pages, which is a lot, you know, it's not going to come up. And then 13, I believe, I actually created. And so I actually just added a dot because I was like, oh crap, I think I missed someone. And so I'll just offer that, if all the ones that are pending actually come into fruition, you know, we could easily have double the amount of disability cultural centers happening. So it's super exciting. Just one slide about conceptual framework, which actually took me a lot to get over when I was in graduate school. I'm like, I still don't understand this. What is this? And then it just like clicked. So if there are any grad students on the Zoom space and you're in that space of either writing your proposal or getting ready to do maybe your exams and it's just not working, just take a breath and just know that it will happen. So I use social justice model of disability, disability identity, disability culture, and counter spaces. Slide 9, I just really wanted to highlight 2 of those concepts though. So the social justice model of disability, which we've heard a little bit about earlier in the day. And so from, there's 3 elements to the social justice model of disability. First, eliminate ableism. Second, empower disabled people. And third, it really emphasizes interdependence of all people. And then along with those components, there's also acknowledging people's privileges and oppressions, diversity and intersectionality of identities, and an educational approach. So I really gravitated towards the social justice model of disability in the research. Sorry. And slide 10, the other concept that really got me excited was the idea of counter spaces. So the creation of counter spaces includes positive identity, finding support, challenging oppressions, and it comes from critical race theory. And slide 11, methods, slide 12. So just overall, the design was, I researched at one site and had 3 virtual synchronous focus groups with disabled students, and that was a total of 10. And then I did 2 virtual semi-structured interviews with the DCC director. And I did not, just to clarify, I didn't want to have like the student data here and the director data here. And it wasn't at all to like confirm or, deny. And this is something that came up then after my defense. And so I'm just still kind of like thinking things through. I think I just got really excited and I wanted to kind of seize the moment to have the ability to also interview the director. But I'd say nearly all the data that I really analyzed was really from the students. The setting was a large public research one higher ed institution. And the participants, this is where I think some of our work, art is similar. They had to identify as disabled, but they did not have to be actually registered at the Disability Resource Center. It could be a current, they needed to be a current student of any academic level, so undergrad, graduate, or professional. And then third eligibility was that there was some level of engagement with the DCC, but that was self-determined. So for some people that meant I'm on the DCC listserv. For other people, it meant I go to the programs regularly. Some people also like before the pandemic, they had been in the space once. Each earned a $30 gift card. And then for trustworthiness, I did member checking, peer debriefing, memos, an audit trail, and reflexive journaling. So kind of the meat of stuff, slide 13, results. Okay. So theme 1, disability identity exploration, things that surface, engagement with the DCC helps students explore their disability identity. And all these names are pseudonyms. So Toby says, quote, "I've never had a letter of accommodation before. I was like, not sure if my disability counted. I was still in that guilty stage of, yeah, I'm disabled, but am I disabled enough?" Shauna discussed about their limited disclosure of their disability. And Jennifer remarked the disability identity is not always clear cut. Slide 15 with theme 2 and 3. Theme 2 being acknowledging internal and external ableism. The participants talked about the engagement with the DCC helps students acknowledge internal and external ableism. And theme 3, modeling accessibility and inclusion. Engagement showed students saw how the DCC naturally modeled accessibility and inclusion. Toby said it doesn't feel like you're being taught. It's not like a training, but you just become more aware of things when you're around people with different access needs. End quote. Tasha saw accessibility trickling to the other cultural centers. Slide 16, theme 4, facilitates community. Engagement with the DCC facilitated community across disciplines and academic levels. So I understood that as being, different than an academic major or discipline. This DCC, because it was, outside, it's a co-curricular unit. You could have a physics major, you could have a math major, you could have an English major, all in the same room. Shauna asserted how the DCC facilitates, quote, good kind of relationships, and that it fosters a good self-esteem, end quote. Just to add also, I know that there were also a participant talked about an intergenerational part. And so since the focus groups had undergrad and graduate and professional students, an undergrad who at the time was only in their first semester talked about how even during the pandemic in virtual spaces, it was really cool and helpful to meet other disabled students that were at like a PhD level. So kind of an informal sort of like role model, I think. Theme 5, uniqueness. Engagement with the DCC showed students its uniqueness being disability centered and also its intersectional approach. Jocelyn lamented that, quote, it's really hard sometimes to find other disability centered spaces sometimes, end quote. And I think this is the last one, slide 17. Theme 6 supports a positive academic experience. So engagement with the DCC indirectly and directly supports their academic experience. So the indirect connection to academic experience, Erin expressed, quote, just like having a space, it feels like an extra safety net and advocacy. And the fact that a disability cultural center exists and affirms disability, so often we're viewed as liabilities and not assets to programs, end quote. And then other students talked about a more direct impact on academic work and academic experience, like specifically receiving resources or tools that help them in their academic subject and or just in general studying. Slide 18. So if I was going to then attempt to answer the research question, so the research question is, what is the impact of a disability cultural center in higher education on disabled students? My answer in at least a firm pencil would be the Disability Cultural Center facilitates and affirms disability identity exploration, models accessibility and inclusion, advances disability culture and community, and supports a positive academic experience in a unique way. So slide 19, future research practice and an invitation for involvement. Slide 20, future research and practice. So for future research, and again, I am talking to any grad student as well as undergrad student out there that, yeah, we need to do more research. And so I think even, in sociology and psychology, we know that not all institutions have a disability studies major or minor, but maybe even just a concentration. So as Toni said earlier too, replicating studies like ours with more DCCs. I had 10 students, which also is valid in qualitative research, and it would be super cool to replicate the studies with more participants. Examining the different structures of DCC. So already today, we've heard like the Minnesota Twin Cities campus, that's a student org. We know, I think the A-Hub is also a student org. And then we have some structures like we heard from Miami, University of Ohio, of kind of being that combination similar to, University of Arizona. And then we have these standalone DCCs. So yes, it is very contextual to your campus. Exploring DCC creation stories and specifically the disabled student activism, exploring collaboration of DCCs and other cultural centers, and demonstrating pathways for future DCC staff. So, in the next few years, if we do as a nation have about 26 disability cultural centers, can you imagine if all 26 of those cultural centers had at least a director, a program coordinator, and a grad student? So, I'm always interested in how do we cultivate our future professional staff members. For future practice, increase communication, share best practices in the community, which is exactly what the symposium is doing. So again, very great appreciations to Javin and Margaret. Increase disability within the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion landscape. And understand that disability culture is accessibility and intersectional programming and behaviors. And so I think initially when I decided to research disability cultural centers, I really was thinking of like, okay, adaptive sports or, bringing in, Alice Wong, watching now, Crip Camp and things like that is disability culture. And just so for my own learning and growth, also just reminding myself that disability culture is, as we all know, is accessibility. They go together, as well as how we behave, how we act. Slide 21, ways to get involved and stay informed. Again, consider doing a poster, an undergraduate research project, master thesis, or a dissertation on disability cultural centers. Create a Google alert for Disability Cultural Center. I learned that from my friend and colleague, Jeff at UMass now, and that is, it's a really great alert system. Support the creations of DCCs, so be an allyship, and support your disability service office to integrate disability culture. And then lastly, slide 22, my contact information, again, Liz Thompson, and then my email, lthompson with no P, LTHOMSON @morris.umn.edu. And then my Google Voice and Text is area code 320-634-6522. Thank you.
Great job, Liz.
Thank you both, Liz and Toni. Those are both incredible presentations on your dissertations. Very innovative research, and you're really laying the foundation of this discipline, this practice for disability cultural centers. So, major props to you both. And we have about 40 minutes for people to share their responses, ask questions. So we definitely have time. I'd even, if Tony's okay with it, if folks still have questions from the earlier session that they didn't get to ask you, is that okay if they ask those questions in this
Yeah,
session as
anything
well?
about, from my perspective, as long as it's, I just want to hold space for the fact that I no longer work there, but so I can only speak from, my perspective from the startup, and I'm still involved with people there, but I'm not currently employed there.
For sure, for sure. So for attendees, so our access tech person, Margaret, will open the chat, and you're welcome to type something in the chat and we'll read it aloud, or you can use the raise hand function and we'll call on you. If you're speaking out loud, we encourage you to share your name first so that it's easier to track the conversation. I will be handling folks who are raising their hands, and Margaret will be handling folks who are, oh no, wait, am I confusing it, Margaret? I'm handling.
This is Margaret. I am happy to read from the chat if you want to do the
chat. That's what it is. I couldn't think of the word. Chat. I've been on Zoom for too long and I forgot. All righty. The first question that we have from raised hands is from Rachel Stewart.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say thank you. My name is Rachel. Just want to say thank you so much for presenting your dissertation research. Like, I am actually in the middle of kind of formulating my dissertation proposal, which I am planning to do on DCCs. Toni knows because I've been chatting with Toni. So Liz, like, amazing. It's interesting that a lot of ideas are things that I've been reading about and trying to figure out how to piece together also the conceptual framework. Whew, it's hard. Okay, so my question is, when it came to collecting data or, kind of gaining entry into, the field, what are some of the barriers or challenges that you had related to that? And how did you address those?
Yeah, Liz, do you want me to take it and then you take it? So I will just say, for me, I was in the space, so I feel like the barrier to get access to the data was removed. However, I did have another challenge of I had to make sure that I was, being respectful of the participants' experience while having this this kind of like dual role as the researcher and the program coordinator. So that I feel like was a challenge. I will also just own the fact that doing this work and holding these identities as disabled people is tough. It's tough. It's great when it's all roses and daisies, but it's also tough to hear the experiences of disabled students. Those are my people. That's my community. And I found that to be one of the biggest barriers to doing this work, where I had to really separate. I mean, I was getting such rich information, but it wasn't all beautiful, right? It was lack of access, denied things, and just things I don't want my community to experience. So I feel like that was I wouldn't say maybe a barrier, but a consideration that I went in very naively. I was like, well, this is my community and I just want to hear all the, the great things, which of course I wanted to hear that too, but I didn't realize the emotional responses I would have to some of the things I was hearing. So I would say buckle up when it comes to that, because it's something. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, this is Liz. I think for the data collection challenges, yeah, I guess I got pretty lucky. I was concerned that the participants wouldn't be as diverse in a variety of identities as I wanted. I know that is out there, as we've said earlier, from even one of the early sessions from Diane and other people, that of course there are queer people, queer disabled people, there's queer BIPOC disabled people, like, you know, so I knew that, and I was afraid that I wasn't gonna get the diversity I wanted, but luckily of the 10 students, it actually was very diverse regarding race, ethnicity, and also disability, as well as sexual orientation. So I was pleasantly surprised with that. I also, it was helpful to do recruitment around and then do the data collection around word of mouth. And so, you know, I also identify as disabled, a parent and non-a-parent. And so I think that also gives some trust with participants. Mm-hmm. And then I guess lastly, I would just, for me, some of my own challenges was two things. One, I definitely had some pretty severe like mental health stuff kind of throughout like my last 2 years, as well as then some physical symptoms with my hands. And so it was hard to type a lot. And I know that there's assistive technology. I know, and I practice sometimes with speech to text, and I just wasn't used to it. So things did just take longer than expected. But that's when I really wanted, I had to lean on my disability community and remind myself, you know, what I learned in the first class around disability studies is that as disabled people, we need more time and space. And so I tried to give myself some self-compassion, because it took, you know, about 7.5 years for my PhD, when some people were done in 4, right? So also I would just suggest that for yourself too, if you identify as.
Yeah.
All righty, thank you for that question. And before we get to the chat, we know that there's a few questions. There's a few questions in the chat that have been asked. We do have one more hand raised that was raised first, so we'll call on Amelia Marie Elstad.
Hi, just realized that I was still on mute. Hello, my name is Amelia Marie. My pronouns are they and she. I am wearing some headphones. I'm a brunette and I'm wearing a star shirt. My question centers around, I did a master's in higher education and I wrote my master's thesis on children of disabled adults, because I am one, in addition to being disabled myself. What research, if somebody is interested in studying disability, but not necessarily specifically disabled cultural centers, what interdisciplinary research was useful to you throughout this process?
So Liz, I'll take a stab at that. So I know that you're probably looking for something a lot more novel, but I have to be honest. There wasn't a lot of interdisciplinary research that discussed disability as a culture and identity. It was largely about cure and fixing, and so I didn't really find that to be useful for this dissertation, because I was largely going against that, to say like, hey, we're more than just the diagnosis. I will say, and I guess it's not truly interdisciplinary, but I did look at other models of cultural centers to like guide my work. But for me, this dissertation was very rooted in cultural centers. So I feel like I would be remiss in, like, I'm sure that there's data out there, but I just don't want to claim like one study that I think would be great to read, because I didn't really pull from that at all. I did pull from general like higher education stats about like disabled people having access to higher ed, but it really didn't focus in on that specifically.
Yeah, this is Liz. I'm not sure if this will be helpful. I guess when you were asking the question, I was thinking about you know, I probably changed, and this was maybe why it took me also partly 7.5 years, is that I changed my topic a few times. And and I was talking, you know, so I talked to people because of my background of working in higher ed and predominantly other cultural centers. I don't know, I just kept on, not being as focused. And so I would have conversations here, you know, with my hand raised, and another conversation here. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. That sounded great. And they were in different disciplines. I think similar to what Toni kind of just said, you know, sometimes we would talk, and also even I've talked to some other people and like, oh, do you have this book, and this book on cultural centers? And like, yes. And that's, you know, going back to the need for more of this research is like, there's less than 5 books on cultural centers in general. And, you know, no books on specifically disability cultural centers.
Yeah.
So I think I found some good, helpful conversations with folks actually in gender and sexuality and LGBTQ studies. And I think that might be kind of because of thinking about bodies and bodies in, you know, quote unquote, atypical spaces. So, yeah.
I just want to add, I think it's really hard because even when disability is included in interdisciplinary work, it's not really from a framework of identity and culture. It's still very much from a service perspective or a diagnostic perspective. And of course, that's one part of the disability experience, but you know, that's not the whole part. And so I think a lot of things that I used were to reinforce that we need to expand our understanding of disability. And so I would often be like, you know, here's what this place is saying about disability, and here's another piece to it. Yeah.
This is Amelia. Thank you. I probably should have clarified more about like what you use to as like a foundation to original research rather than labeling it as an interdisciplinary research, because I know the point is that there's not a lot, so that you have to draw from different places. Well, but thank you.
Yeah, I think, so just to add, I think what I did was I tried to mirror the benefits or why we need more on cultural centers from what was out there on other cultural centers in general. But even that was pretty scarce. So it, yeah, I'm sorry if I misinterpreted your question. My apologies.
This is Margaret. I'm seeing a no from Amelia Marie. So we've had a few things coming into the chat. One is kind of like a share, so I'm going to go ahead and read that, and then I'll go back to Jay-Jan's question. So Courtney shared in the chat, in graduate work, I conducted qualitative sociological research across the university, centering the lived experiences of students disclosing their disabilities to professors and administrators. And I found that students really wanted to share in depth and felt a sense of relief speaking about it. During my 16 interviews, many went well over an hour, several stating how glad they were to talk about disability identity. I feel like this really points to how needed DCCs are as both safe and brave spaces to practice disability identity formation and acceptance. And just a thank you for sharing your research to both of you. So if you want to respond to that, but that would be awesome. I'm also going to read Jay-Jan's question, which is, thank you both for this great info. What was something that was good or positive that was a good or positive surprise that you learned from your research?
Liz, you want to go, or do you want me to go? Whatever you want.
Yeah, I can jump. This is Liz. I think one of the things that I learned and was surprised about was that, so definitely because of my prior professional work of working at 2 other cultural centers, I knew I had a pretty strong bias. So I had to really put that into check. And I think I came in a little bit with an attitude that, like, even though I had had satisfactory experiences with previous, disability service offices to get accommodations. So I have never had overtly negative experiences. I guess what I learned was that, initially I think I thought sort of DRC's bad, DCC's good, and I was really, and I was afraid that maybe that bias was gonna feed into my research. And so I think I just realized that that's a very much like a social construction, and I'm not saying, and I don't want to invalidate or discount, anyone who's had negative experiences with your unit that facilitates accommodations. But I think I just had some self-reflection that, DRCs and DCCs can really healthy, friendly coexist together if they are 2 standalone units. And it's really about the people who work there. And then if you kind of go follow the breadcrumbs, the people who work there, what's the job description ad, what's their areas of study, what's their approach, how are people being interviewed, as Haley talked about. It's so vital to have disabled people on those search committees. So I think that was one of my takeaways. Toni?
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest surprises, and I just want to make sure I made this clear, when I said that I created this dichotomy in my research, which was within the DCC, the other piece was the institution as a whole. So not just within the DRC, but the institution as a whole. And one thing that surprised me was, as I alluded to in a previous session, the University of Arizona is well known for disability access and, had a disability services office predating the Americans with Disabilities Act. So one thing I was surprised was that there were still so many negative experiences related to accommodations. I mean, maybe not surprised, but I thought to myself, if this is the experiences of these students at an institution that is highly rated in terms of access, I mean, I don't know. I can only imagine what other people, and I mean, I can use my own experience, to make some, to bridge that gap. But I think I was, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised that the participants were able to explore their disability identity in such a positive way. I feel like if I was asked some of those questions, I'm not sure I would have been able to, just given the situation. And I was like pleasantly so happy that there were so many people identifying. That might sound like corny, but as a disabled person, that like excited me. It didn't really surprise me, but I was excited. Like, yes, you're my people in a lot of ways. So that's one thing.
Great, thank you. This is Margaret. Okay, I'm gonna do 2 more chat questions and then we will go to hand raised. So we had a question from Adam, and the question is in the chat. It says, thanks for the great presentation. I'm a grad student doing research that's partly about students with acquired physical disabilities that they acquired during their time in undergrad and how they navigated that identity change. I'm wondering if you have any tips and or advice for making sure my research is relevant or useful for the future study of disability culture in higher education.
Just the fact that you're doing it, that's the first step. Like, we need more. So thank you so much for including that. We need more. There's very little on that. I mean, even just disability as a culture or disability identity, I mean, there's few things on that. So I think, try to get it published if you could get it out there in multiple formats, maybe in like an open access format. I think that would be wonderful so that it reaches more people, because sometimes, I think about like who's reading academic journals. I think obviously they have their place, but I like to think about how I can get information to more people.
Yeah, this is Liz. Yeah, just continuing off of that, Toni, was published her part of her dissertation in the JPED, the Journal for Post-Secondary Education and Disability. I will probably not get mine done this summer, as today is July the 8th, but hopefully I will do a new deadline of December. And I would like to, I guess, initially, put it out there to the Journal of College Student Development, which is one of the leading student affairs journals. And so, yeah, I guess just not knowing exactly, more of the details, and if you're a master's student, Adam, or PhD. But yeah, I mean, definitely JPED, and of course AHEAD. I'm involved in AHEAD, and it's really great. I guess just like spread the love around to be in different communities.
Absolutely. Liz, do you think you could find the link to the article that we put in the hub for on disability cultural centers? Because that might be another avenue point that might be useful. That's a little bit more open access.
Yeah, this is Liz. So yeah, and so like with Toni's example, so also sometimes associations will have their kind of more polished professional kind of journal, as well as then a more like a magazine or a newsletter or something like that sometimes is also easier to get published. But yeah, I've got it. So
yeah, thank you. And it just says, could Toni also link her dissertation? My dissertation is public. You should have no problem. If anything, though, I'll just put my email in the chat, and anybody could email me for it.
Hey, this is Margaret speaking. Thank you both. I'm looking at the time. We're still pretty good. We have a fair amount of time. Also, if it's okay, I'm just going to interject for Adam that I would say at UIC, we have had a few, like one kind of one-on-one contact that we have with students is an acquired disability. And it might be worth connecting that to some of the identity development angles on the work that a disability cultural center does that both folks have touched on that we heard from tonight. Because a lot of time in our conversations with people, it's about sorting out how to navigate the emotional experience of a big shift and how you interface with the world, usually without wanting to feel a lot of shame or like internalized depression, basically. So some of it can be giving people permission to be upset about a big change that they weren't expecting, that's kind of tricky to navigate, but also give them like, just talk with them about how they can frame that for themselves as something other than, oh my gosh, it's a tragedy, something like that. So anyway, I hope it's okay that I interjected, but it was very relevant to your question, some of our experiences. So, okay, we got another question from the chat that came directly, so I'm going to read it without a name. So this question is, as someone who wants to become an access consultant, but is also disabled themselves, how can higher education do well in balancing the independence, but also the co-facilitation between disability cultural centers and disability resource centers? So it seems like this is another, like a great question about this tension that's kind of been coming up in some of the sessions about, you know, how is the work different? How can it be complementary? Any thoughts about that?
This is Toni. There is tension, but I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, I don't think or anybody is saying that we want one over the other. I think we don't want just DCCs to take over, right? Because we need disability services for a lot of reasons. I think where the tension is a disability services office can't do it all, because they're tasked with everything related to disability. And then what happens is that the culture and identity piece gets lost in that. And so that's why there's this need for, you know, that's another reason why there's this need for a space. But I definitely think that in situations where it's the best possible is that they're both thriving, right? And in my opinion, it's when I see more of the overlap is when the disability services office is taking more of a social model approach, is seeking ways to go beyond compliance, because I think that benefits the work of disability cultural centers as well. When students can explore their identity in this space, but then don't necessarily have to, like, you know, overly validate just to get their experience, just to get maybe access to notes or something. So I think about, you know, I like to reframe the work of disability services to be more, be as social model as possible in the way we even handle accommodations. Because in places that I've seen disability cultural centers thrive, it's when their disability services offices are also very progressive in their approach. But I don't want to send the message of that we are against one another. I think there is that tension, but I think some of that tension is beneficial to push us forward, because disability services offices largely exist because of a law, right? And disabled people know that. Disability cultural centers exist because you want us to feel welcome and you want us to celebrate our identity. So there's no, like, law that you have to have it. So I think just the messaging is different. And somebody says in the chat, cripple all the DRCs. Yeah, I'd like to see more disability leadership in DRCs. I hope that, so I think we have to work together. That's the long and short. We have to work together. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, this is Liz. It's two things. Yeah, totally agreed, right? Like, yeah, I'm not also asserting like we should have one over the other, even if that one would be disability cultural centers. But I guess I'm remembering one time when I did my, you know, intake for accommodations, and it was good. It was a really friendly conversation. However, you know, they didn't ask me anything around, you know, like the intersections of my disability with my other identities. And so I guess, yeah, I mean, just like, so maybe, you know, something on the more like disability resource center side or service office side would be reviewing, you know, those conversations of that initial intake process. I guess the other thing too, one of the participants in my study, somehow the question came up, how did you even get connected with or know about the DCC at the institution? And they said after an orientation with the Disability Service Office, they kind of like all together took a field trip to that Disability Cultural Center. And so that introduced them to the space, and then also that showed to them that these two units actually were working in partnership, and they weren't adversarial, in a way.
Yeah, that's a great point.
All right. I will take a question from the raised hands. So Trail.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, my name is Trail, she, her pronouns, and I'm calling from Dubai. And this has been so fantastic. I just love this conversation, and I'm getting really excited. So I'm doing my EdD right now, and my focus will be on DCCs. And I kind of want to do all the things, but I can't. So I'm trying to focus a little bit. And one of the things I think that I wanted to ask y'all about is I would like to look at multiple universities at the same time. Asking similar questions to both of y'all, focused more on creation of a disability subculture and comparing that maybe a little bit to the institutional culture. But I feel like looking at multiple universities is going to be very challenging. But I guess I was wondering if y'all had any advice for, I don't know, or thoughts on doing it in multiple places, multiple sites.
Yes, this is Toni. So first, I love your enthusiasm. I share it. But a couple of things. One, somebody once told me a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And I really believe in that. So I'll just leave that there. But two, I think it sounds really good in theory, and it's not, I'm not saying it's impossible, but if you're going to collect data from multiple institutions, then that means you need multiple IRB approvals. And for a dissertation, I'm just being really real as somebody that just did this. For a dissertation, that could be a lot. And that's all before you even get the data. So I think, just thinking about your time frame, how much spoons do you have to put into that? Maybe you can do two. But as when I was doing my doc work, I originally wanted to kind of look at Syracuse University and then also the University of Arizona. And I got a lot of mentorship that, for the purposes of a dissertation, it would be beneficial to kind of focus on one. Now, of course, everybody, has their own dissertation, but I think for the purposes of a dissertation, there's just so many other things that you have to get done that, you want to weigh the pros and cons of that. And maybe that's actually, after you graduate where you collaborate with other people that are kind of doing this work so that it's a more natural collaboration.
Yeah, this is Liz. I think my answer, Trail. We've talked, and yeah, you'll figure it out. You'll be fine. Yeah, agree with Toni. I at one time thought I was going to do 5 sites, and non-participation of observation. I was going to be at those five sites for a week. And so even before the pandemic, looking back, I don't see how I could have done that. So one of the best advice I got from one of my newer committee members was, yeah, just do one site, X amount of people is enough. And just, yeah, get it done. And then two, I feel like I'm just echoing Toni, but that's what's so great. I mean, Toni has been a good, you know, step and a half, meal and a half before me. And so I've had that privilege to have someone be, you know, the person knocking the weeds before me so that the trail is a little bit easier. And that's, you know, that's just what I hope also to give back to anyone else too. But yeah, just, you know, get it done. The dissertation is just one piece of your future work. And you can do things after you get done and after you have that academic experience and confidence also behind you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but please reach out. Like, I know we don't have a lot of time to answer everybody's questions, but as somebody that very much felt like in a lone boat in terms of like being a doc student doing this, I mean, I had a lot of support and mentorship, but please reach out. And, you know, if I can't be of support, I'm sure I know somebody that's done it. I think that's the biggest part. I think that's why Liz and I have thrived together, because we were like, oh, 2 people doing this work, let's do it. But I will say, and I know it doesn't sound like the most positive, but I will still stick with a good dissertation is done. And you can publish all you want from it.
I'm also excited to see that there's like, you know, Rachel and Adam, it sounds like there's like, you know, I'm not alone here either. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Trail. You can do it. We got you.
Yep. And next year we'll be coming to your sessions.
Yes.
This is Margaret. I love that idea. I know, I'm trying to think, we kind of didn't figure out a way for people to just connect somehow, like outside of the sessions, but if you want an idea, go meet on one of our posts or something about the symposium, like, hello. So, okay, let's see, we have 3 minutes. I'm telling myself that's a long time because it's 60 seconds, 3 times, we'll see. I think I'm gonna add one more question and then maybe we can start saying goodnight. Does that sound okay to both of you? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna read from the chat. Owen had a question and it was about cross-disability solidarity. So saying a little more about some of your findings in that direction, like who counts. So Owen said, can either of you expand on how DCCs help strengthen cross-disability solidarity, and maybe expand some people's sense of what, as one of Dr. Thompson's participants referenced, quote unquote, counted as disabled. In particular, are students who identify as neurodivergent or living with chronic illness seeing themselves within disability community and vice versa, or perhaps as living with mental illness, madness, psychiatric disability too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I will just say for my study, I did not ask one single thing about type of disability. All they had to do was identify as. I did not question it. I did not police it. If they identified, I took it as word. I didn't ask. All my questions were, you know, tell me more about your disability related experience on campus. I purposely broadened it because I didn't want to reinforce the hierarchies that exist within the community of like, this counts, this doesn't count. And I thought it was really important to not put any kind of qualifier. So I just said anybody that identifies. I mean, I didn't check, and even within the DCC, it's not like we check diagnoses at the door to be like, you're one of us or not. I think that a lot of them that interviewed in the beginning, as they were doing the interview, they didn't maybe realize they had such an identity as a disabled person, but then towards the end of the interview, they were, you know, really clear about that identity. So I think it also depends on the culture and the space that you create for people to actually explore that and that trust that exists.
Yeah, this is Liz. I did a pre-survey. I asked people to do a pre-survey with some, I think, 8, and it's in the dissertation, which is not yet published, but hopefully will be soon. Kind of 8 questions, and the main 3 were the eligibility of a current student at the institution, if they identified as disabled, as well as then some level of engagement with the particular DCC. If they answered yes to all those 3, then they were in, you know, it was fine. The other 5 were, though, around demographic questions, because I did want to have diversity intentionally. And so, you know, if more participants like had all had like, you know, mobility disability, then I would have recruited more. I think nearly everyone had multiple disabilities. So, and definitely at least, I want to say at least half around psychiatric and mental illness. So, yeah, so I did do that, but but then once we got to the focus groups, you know, everyone knew the eligibility requirements, and then they disclosed if they wanted to. So I definitely did not out them in that way once we got to the focus groups. But yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, that was 40 minutes of Q&A. Thank you, Toni and Liz, for your contributions, for your presentations, for answering all those questions. It seems like a lot of people got a lot out of it. Some people are making connections in the chat. Y'all reach out to each other, build, you know, this is part of building the discipline, building the profession, the practice, right? So this has been an amazing panel. Thank you everyone for joining us and participating. Thank you to the access workers. I also want to give a special shout out to Tina Dillon, who has been captioning for us for the past like 10 hours, I think. So major props to Tina. And you get some good rest this weekend. And yes, and of course to our panelists. And yes, all of our access workers have done an amazing job today, and very grateful for them. Day 1 is done. Day 1 is a wrap. Woohoo! Tomorrow we'll be getting together for more sessions focused on DCC's existing practices and nurturing DCCs as they grow on to the future. So thank you all. Have a good night, good morning, whichever time zone you may be in. You know, take some good rest, and we'll be doing this all again tomorrow for another 10 hours of DCC fun. All right, see you all at the second day of the DCC Symposium.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. It was great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Javin.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.